4 college students. One November night. 15 minutes that would destroy countless lives forever. This is the story of what Bryan Kohberger did before the world knew his name. November 12, 2022. A Saturday night in Moscow, Idaho. A small college town where most people didn't lock their doors, where parents sent their kids to school without fear, where the biggest concerns were midterm exams and weekend plans. At 1122 King Road, an off-campus rental house near the University of Idaho, 6 roommates were living what felt like an ordinary college experience. Kaylee Goncalves, 21, a senior with her whole future ahead of her. She'd just gotten a job offer in Texas and was planning to move after graduation. She had a dog named Murphy that she loved like a child. That night, she went out with her best friend since 6th grade. Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee's inseparable best friend. They'd grown up together, gone to school together, and now they were graduating together. The kind of friendship that transcends words, built on years of shared memories and dreams about the future. Zana Kernadel, 20, a junior studying marketing. She had a bright smile and even brighter ambitions. That night, she attended a fraternity party with her boyfriend. Ethan Chapin, 20, a freshman, Zana's boyfriend, a triplet with a close-knit family. He'd attended a Sigma Chi formal that evening with his sister before heading to the fraternity house with Zana. And 2 other roommates, Bethany Funk and Dylan Mortensen, both on the first floor of the house, both about to survive something no one should ever witness. According to documents released after Kohberger's sentencing, the day started normally. Between 10 and 11 a.m., Bethany checked her Find My app and saw that Kaylee, Maddie, Zana, and Dylan were at Taco Bell, just college students grabbing food, nothing remarkable. They took naps, they got ready for the night, they went out. By all accounts, it was a perfect Saturday, the kind of day you forget 5 years later because nothing bad happened. Nothing bad had happened yet. Just 8 miles away in Pullman, Washington, Bryan Kohberger was preparing. He was a PhD student at Washington State University, enrolled in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology, a teaching assistant, someone who graded papers about criminal behavior while allegedly planning to commit one of Idaho's most notorious crimes. His apartment reportedly contained books on criminal psychology, forensic science, and the study of killers. He'd spent years analyzing how criminals think, how they operate, how they evade capture. Now, he was about to become what he'd studied. Cell phone records would later reveal something chilling. Kohberger's phone had connected to cell towers near 1122 King Road at least 23 times before the murders, starting as far back as August 2022. All but one of those times were late at night or in the early morning hours. He'd been watching, circling, studying. A classmate at WSU told investigators that she'd seen photos of herself and her friends on Kohberger's phone during a Dateline special about the case. Photos she believed came from her public Instagram account. She'd never spoken to Kohberger, but he sat near her in class, on the rare occasions he actually attended. Another woman who matched with Kohberger in Tinder in fall 2022 told police they'd discussed the murder of one of her friends. He told her he was studying criminology. They talked about horror movies. Red flags that only make sense in hindsight. A former friend described him as very intelligent, but also selfish. The friend told detectives he tried to use his status as a teaching assistant to inappropriately interact with female students. That Kohberger talked constantly about wanting a girlfriend. In October and November 2022, the months leading up to the murders, this same friend noticed injuries on Kohberger, large scratches on his face, like the scratches from fingernails, wounds on his knuckles. When asked, Kohberger claimed he'd been in a car accident. But there was no accident. There was only preparation. On the night of November 12th, as Kaylee and Maddie laughed at a local bar, as Zana and Ethan enjoyed a party, as two roommates settled in for a quiet night at home, Bryan Kohberger turned off his phone. At 2:47 a.m., his phone stopped connecting to cell towers in Pullman. He was going dark. What happened next would be pieced together from forensic evidence, surviving witness testimony, and ultimately Kohberger's own guilty plea. At approximately 4 a.m. on November 13, 2022, a white Hyundai Elantra was captured on surveillance cameras near 1122 King Road. Bryan Kohberger entered through a sliding glass door on the back of the house, the kitchen entrance, unlocked. Inside, the house was quiet, dark. Most of the residents were asleep, but Zana Kernadel was still awake. She'd just received a DoorDash order at 4 a.m., food for a late-night snack, just a college student up too late. Kohberger moved through the house carrying a K-bar-style knife, a 7-inch fixed blade commonly used by military and law enforcement, a weapon designed to kill. He climbed to the third floor first, Madison Mogen's bedroom. She was asleep. So was Kaylee Goncalves, who'd crawled into bed with her best friend the way they'd done countless times before. Two girls who'd been inseparable since 6th grade, together even in their final moments. What happened in that room was so violent, and investigators would later describe the victims' faces as unrecognizable. So much blood that officers couldn't immediately determine all the injuries. Kaylee had unique horizontal pattern wounds that investigators still couldn't explain at the time of Kohberger's sentencing. A K-bar knife sheath was left behind on the bed. Single-source DNA was found on the snap of that sheath. DNA that would later be matched to Bryan Kohberger through his father's genetic material recovered from the family's trash in Pennsylvania. Kohberger then moved to the second floor. He encountered Zana Kernadel, awake, alert, and according to the prosecutor's recounting of evidence, there was a struggle. She fought back. Her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was asleep in her bed. He never had a chance. The attack was so sudden, so brutal, that blood seeped through the side of the house before their bodies were discovered. Zana's body was found on the floor, Ethan's on the bed. 4 lives ended in approximately 15 minutes. But 2 roommates survived. Dylan Mortensen was on the first floor. According to police documents released after Kohberger's sentencing, she heard something that night. Noises, movement, possibly crying. She opened her bedroom door, and she saw him, a man dressed in black, wearing a mask, with bushy eyebrows. He walked past her towards the sliding glass door, the same door he'd entered through. Dylan stood frozen, terrified, not understanding what she'd just witnessed. She locked her door and didn't come out. For hours, she stayed in her room, traumatized, confused, afraid. It wasn't until nearly 11:45 a.m., almost 8 hours after the murders, that one of the surviving roommates called a friend. According to documents, she told them she thought something was not right in her house. The friend arrived first. He spoke to the roommates on the first floor. Then he went upstairs, into Zana's room. What he saw would haunt him forever. He called 911. The call came in as an unconscious person report. No one knew yet that they were reporting a quadruple homicide. When Moscow police arrived at 1122 King Road, they walked into a nightmare. Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson, the lead detective, described what officers found in his first interview after Kohberger's sentencing. The common areas on the second floor looked normal, like what you'd expect a house full of college kids to look like. But the bedrooms told a different story. Blood on the third-floor stairwell, blood seeping from Ethan's body through the exterior wall of the house. Kaylee's dog Murphy locked in her third-floor bedroom, scared and alone. I don't think any of us were prepared that it was 4 young, completely innocent kids, he said. How do you prepare for that? Ethan Chapin's mother, Stacy, would later describe getting the call that every parent fears. Her son, her baby, was gone. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, would tell mourners at a vigil that Kaylee and Madison died together in the same room, in the same bed. Best friends since 6th grade, inseparable in life, together in death. The Moscow Police Department, a small force in a town of 25,000 people, had never investigated anything like this. They called in the Idaho State Police, the FBI. Resources flooded in. But for weeks, they had no suspect. Just a community in terror, students fleeing campus, parents pulling their kids out of school, a town that would never feel completely safe. And a killer who thought he'd gotten away with it. For 47 days, Bryan Kohberger watched the news, saw his crime dominate headlines, witnessed the fear spreading through Moscow. He attended classes at WSU, graded capers, acted normal. But investigators were closing in. The white Hyundai Elantra captured on surveillance video became the key. On November 29th, a Washington State University police officer searched vehicles matching that description on campus and found one registered to Bryan Kohberger. A criminology PhD student, a teaching assistant, someone who lived 8 miles from the crime scene. Suddenly, everything started clicking into place. Cell phone records showed Kohberger's phone near the house 23 times before the murders, always late at night or early morning. Then, after November 13th, it stopped completely. He never returned to that area. Up until November 13 was regular visits to Moscow, Gilbertson said in his interview. After November 13, every bit of that changed. It all stopped. The DNA on the knife sheath matched. Surveillance footage showed his car. His phone records placed him at the scene. On December 27th, investigators traveled to Pennsylvania, where Kohberger was spending Christmas break with his parents. They watched the house. They saw Kohberger wearing surgical gloves, sorting through trash, placing bags in a neighbor's garbage can. They recovered that trash. DNA testing confirmed it. The trash contained genetic material from Kohberger's father, a familial match to the DNA on the knife sheath. They had him. December 30th, 2022, just before dawn, snow blanketing the quiet Pennsylvania suburb. A SWAT team surrounded the Kohberger family home. Flashlights, shouting, the thunder of boots on frozen ground. Bryan Kohberger was found inside, awake, alert, wearing surgical gloves even in his parents' home at 6 a.m. Police, search warrant. He didn't fight, didn't run. He simply stood there with what officers described as a blank stare. As they led him away in handcuffs, he asked one question. Was anyone else arrested? No one else had been arrested, because there was only one killer, and they'd just caught him. Later that morning, in an interview room at a Pennsylvania State Police barracks, Detective Brett Payne and Lieutenant Gilbertson sat down with Kohberger. According to documents released after his sentencing, Kohberger initially engaged in small talk. He told them he looked familiar. He expressed concern about his parents and his dog after the SWAT operation. They asked about his studies at WSU, his aspirations to become a professor, the competitive admissions process for his PhD program. Then they asked if he knew about what happened in November just off the University of Idaho campus. Kohberger replied, "Of course." He said he'd gotten an alert on his phone about a killing in Moscow. Then the detectives asked if he knew anything about it. Kohberger's demeanor changed instantly. "I don't want to talk anymore." He invoked his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. The interview was over. For the next 2.5 years, Kohberger would maintain his innocence. His defense team would file motion after motion. The case would drag on. A gag order would prevent anyone involved from speaking publicly. And the families would wait, and wait, and wait for justice that felt like it would never come. July 2nd, 2025, more than 2 years after his arrest, Bryan Kohberger, now 30 years old, stood in Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho. For months, prosecutors had been preparing for a death penalty trial. The case had been moved from Moscow to Boise due to pretrial publicity. Jury selection was approaching. And then, without warning, everything changed. Kohberger's attorneys negotiated a plea deal. He would plead guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. In exchange, prosecutors would drop the death penalty. 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 10 years for burglary. No trial, no appeals, just an admission of guilt and a lifetime behind bars. When asked to enter his plea, Kohberger spoke clearly. Guilty. 4 times he said it, once for each life he'd stolen. But he offered no explanation, no motive, no apology. Prosecutor Bill Thompson recited the evidence, the cell phone data, the DNA, the surveillance video. He laid out how the state believed Kohberger entered the house, killed the 4 students, and fled. But when asked why prosecutors didn't require Kohberger to explain his motive as part of the deal, Thompson said, "The law does not give the court or us the power to require specific factual allocution." In other words, they couldn't force him to tell them why, and he wouldn't volunteer it. July 23, 2025, Sentencing Day. The families of the victims filled the courtroom. Many wore shirts with photos of their lost loved ones. Some held each other. Others sat rigid, barely breathing. One by one, they addressed Kohberger. Olivia Goncalves, Kaylee's sister, stood and looked directly at the man who'd murdered her best friend. "My sister Kaylee and her best friend Maddie were not yours to take. They were not yours to study, to stalk, or to silence. They're everything you could never be: loved, accepted, vibrant, accomplished, brave, and powerful." Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate who'd seen the killer, spoke publicly for the first time. Her statement was emotional, raw. The guilt of surviving, the trauma of witnessing, the impossibility of moving forward. Karen Laramie, Madison's mother, released a statement through her attorney saying the plea deal brought some closure but would never bring back her daughter. But Kaylee Goncalves' parents were less forgiving. They issued a statement expressing disappointment that the plea agreement didn't include Kohberger revealing a motive. They called it an easy way out and no answers. The judge asked if Kohberger wanted to speak. He looked up, that same blank expression that had been analyzed 1,000,000 times in courtroom footage. "I respectfully decline to speak, Your Honor." Judge Stephen Hippler sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences, meaning he would serve them back to back, not concurrently, plus 10 years for burglary, plus $250,000 in fines, plus $20,000 in restitution to the victims' families. The gavel fell. Bryan Kohberger was property of the state of Idaho, forever. To this day, no one knows why. Why did Bryan Kohberger drive to 1122 King Road that November morning? What was he looking for? Who was his target if there was one? Former Moscow Police Chief James Fry admitted after sentencing, "New information could come out still. There's always cases that 10 years later, somebody says something." But Kohberger isn't talking. He sits in his cell in J Block at Idaho Maximum Security Institution, 23 hours a day, for the next 40, 50, maybe 60 years. The man who studied killers became one. The student of criminal psychology now lives as his own case study. And the 4 lives he took, Kaylee, Madison, Zana, and Ethan, are reduced to evidence in a case file, photos in a memorial garden, names on scholarships, memories that fade a little more each year. This is the crime that led Bryan Kohberger to prison. This is the night that changed everything. And this is the debt he'll spend the rest of his life paying, one silent day at a time in a concrete cell where time doesn't pass, it just accumulates, like the blood he spilled on a November morning in 2022. 4 families will never be whole again. A community will never feel completely safe, and Bryan Kohberger will never explain why. Some questions don't have answers. Some crimes are simply evil. And some punishments, like 23 hours a day in solitary confinement for the next 50, 60 years, might be worse than death. What do you think? Was the plea deal justice, or did Kohberger get off too easy? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe for part 3, where we explore what life in J Block is doing to Kohberger, and whether he's already starting to break.